Welcome boys and girls, Christine here with a discussion about the Empire in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. It is a good race, has been so ever since they were reworked in Thrones of Decay, and I would absolutely recommend getting that DLC if you're looking to play an Imperial campaign. But even if you don't own any DLC for the Empire and just can't play Karl Franz and Gelt, it's still going to be a fairly solid experience. Insofar as solid experiences do exist in Warhammer 3. The bigger issues of the Empire have more to do with the kind of problems that Warhammer 3 in itself does have, specifically late game potential, the lack of endgame, siege issues, etc, etc. But the Empire as a race does work relatively well. Emphasis on relatively. If we look at Karl Franz, Elspeth, and Gelt, they are three great legendary lords. Marcus Wolfhart and Volkmar, not so much. So that is the first issue. You have some of the legendary lords that are really good, some of the best campaigns in the game, or some of the best legendary lord campaigns in the game, especially Karl Franz and Gelt to a degree. But then you have some of the worst campaigns with Marcus Wolfhart and Volkmar. And that is the first thing that I think Creative Assembly should address with regards to Empire. They did a great job with really making Karl Franz and Gelt unique. Elspeth, as well as a new legendary lord, though given the problems of the late game issues of Warhammer 3 in general, I feel like Elspeth and Gelt kind of end up feeling one note in terms of their campaigns, because they are so good, so powerful, that they end up decimating anyone that stands in their path. So kind of a bit one-dimensional, but that's more of a game issue as opposed to their design issues. There are, of course, some balancing aspects to talk about these legendary lords as well. That is one thing, the legendary lord situation. Other things to talk about would be research tree. Yes, certain things can be improved. There's a lot of power over here, absolutely, but it takes a lot of time. And by the time you get it, a lot of these, like outside of, getting a bit of hero capacity or getting, say, Imperial Architects, you're going to have long since won your campaign. On top of that, there is absolutely something completely broken about the Empire, and that is the noble trait. See, if we look at the noble trait, right, as a trait, it gives you minus 25% upkeep for characters in force, minus 25% construction time for old buildings in a local region, and 10% income from old buildings. It's really construction time that matters because it stacks. And it is a trait that you can have on both lords and heroes. So this is quite absurd. And it's not some trait limited by influence. It's a trait that you can randomly get. If you get it, ridiculously good, but you can also use the load save character system. And you will be gaining noble characters throughout your campaign when you play it, be it with lords and heroes. It doesn't matter what we're talking about. So that is one of the factors. Like, we do have the situation in Warhammer 3 where the early game is the most significant part of a campaign, and Noble just allows you to abuse a lot of things. They need to do some overhauls. Like, I think the Noble effect is fine in itself, but the fact it stacks, not so much. So that is one of the issues in terms of balancing. And that's kind of the thing about the Empire. In terms of race design, it's good. In terms of balancing, that is where there's a lot of question marks with regards to them. Like, you consider Karl Franz, he just abuses everything because he can get 1 or 2 population surplus in a target settlement or in a target region, depend on the level of Emperor's Decree that he has, because you can upgrade this with Emperor of the Empire, just need to get enough prestige. So that is a huge level of power that you can get. And, well, let's just say that in terms of building a massive world-spanning empire, even with climate limitations that Karl Franz does have, it is ridiculously powerful. I would say the issue with Elspeth, not so much Geld, but the issue with Elspeth, she does have a lot of power, but it's the kind of power that requires you to get to really tier 4 or tier 5 to fully unlock. Not that her early game is challenging, it's just more of that grind. Karl Franz is more dynamic, more interesting from that perspective. So even with the good legendary lords, there's some issues with balancing. And also, there's Gelt just completely breaking the game in every way that counts. On top of that, when we look at the Imperial Army roster, we do notice a big problem from a balancing perspective as well. So the Empire has artillery, cavalry, ranged units, ranged gunpowder units, ranged archers, crossbowmen, all really solid, all really good. Gunpowder units, specifically Honkelin long rifles and known Ironsides being better than Huntsmen. But regardless of that, the roster works across the board. Basically, everything that's on this side works. The issue is a lot of the things that are in the barracks chain, not so much. And this is the problem because you have the Imperial playstyle, the Empire playstyle, which is focused on infantry to hold the line, range units, cavalry, and artillery, as well as magic to eliminate your foes. But you need good melee to do so. If you look at Kislev and if you look at Cathay, it's not their infantry that strictly wins the battles, but their infantry is good enough in terms of leadership and armor that they will hold the line very well. And it's similar with the dwarves, actually. Like, the Empire may not have gyrocopters, sure, or flying units, but they do have cavalry for mobility on the battlefield. But unlike the dwarves, the Empire does not have the infantry capability to match other factions from either a leadership perspective, melee defense perspective, or armor perspective. If we look at every melee infantry unit that the Empire has early on, we look at swordsmen, we look at spearmen shields, we look at halberdiers, we can even look at flagellants. Their level of armor is either non-existent or very low. 30 armor is not, it might as well not exist. Yes, they have things like charge reflection and things like charge defense versus large, but again, it is not enough. To the point that Kislev warriors, which is a tier 1 unit that you can recruit from any settlement, are substantially better in most ways that actually count in a battle compared to halberdiers, especially given the kind of foes both the Empire and Kislev are going to fight. Because it's not like you're fighting certain factions where the Empire's strengths would really pay off. You're fighting the same stuff as Kislev, except Kislev is much better in terms of their unit roster. And then we look at greatswords. Yes, they have 95 armor, but even then, they're not capable of winning against Chaos Warriors, nor are they capable of holding a line because they lack shield. So what the Empire does need, more so than anything really, would be a heavy melee infantry line holder that they can acquire early on. And this is the thing that separates the Empire from so many other factions. High Elves have them with Spearmen, Dwarves have them with Dwarf Warriors, Cathay has them with Jade Warriors, Kislev has it with Kislevite Warriors even, or Armored Kossars, which are a tier 2 unit, let alone Sargard, which are tier 3, and let me just say it as plainly as I can, Sargard eat great swords for lunch. Now, what I would say is that the annoying part about all of this is that the Empire actually does have some good melee infantry units that they can use in their campaign that can hold their own. So on one hand, with greatswords, you do have Karabur greatswords. Now, Karabur greatswords are roughly the same unit, but not quite the same. They are unbreakable, that's pros and cons, but they also have melee attack and leadership for allies in range. So these guys are better line holders, or better as melee infantry, compared to regular greatswords in a fairly substantial way. And then we get Eldred's Guards. They're not Kislev, they're not Armored Kossars, but they're still pretty damn good when you look at these guys. So they have Encourage, they have Expert Charge Defense, they have Charge Reflection, they have Bonus versus Large, and they have 70 armor. This is where we talk again about balancing, because if you're playing Elspeth or Gelt, you can start getting these relatively early on. If you're playing Karl Franz, not so much. So I think like the Electrocount Troopers should be acquired perhaps in a different way. Like the kind of benefits you get from Electrocounts, that's one thing, but maybe getting the actual troopers should be, for Karl Franz at least, dependent on alliances and relationships with the various Electrocounts that exist, as opposed to you having to control that territory, keep control of it, you can't even really gain it for alliances. So that's one of the things I think CA should do it. So for instance, if I have a good relationship with Elspeth in this campaign, she'll always take Solent, then I can get her Electric Count State Troopers. I think that would be a great way of changing the dynamic in the Empire, because right now, you're heavily encouraged to essentially abuse these Electric Counts, and you actively want to undermine them because you want their capitals for yourself. Now, of course, if there were still items, you'd probably still want their items for yourself, but at this point, there are certain state troopers that are just so damn good that you really, really do want that as quickly as possible. Though, to be blunt about it, there's only some state troopers that fall in this category. So there's Eldred's Guards, of course. There's Caribou Greatswords, which you start with as Karl Franz. There's the Shorefires, absolutely. And then there's the Mortars, which don't have friendly fire. Everything else you kind of don't care about. So there are absolutely balanced decisions to be made with the Electric Count State Troopers, how you acquire them. It's kind of telling that for both Elspeth and Gelt, what CA basically did is like, okay, you don't have to worry about the territory or the factions, you can just research it and they get added to the pool. So I think Electric Count State Troopers need to be handled in a better way, because the units are there, at least some of them. And then the ones that aren't so great as units could overall be rebalanced as well. Right, Knights of More, not so much. Stir River Patrol, kind of, like, essentially what I'm saying, like, a lot of these just feel like fluff. And they shouldn't be like fluff. They should be substantially better. Maybe a limited resource, depend on the unit. Like, things like infantry should be more widely available than cavalry. Cavalry should be more limited, but more powerful. That would be my perspective. Personally, I would even take a 50 armor infantry unit as the Empire. I don't think Creative Assembly wants to do different balancing for campaign and multiplayer. I mean, the sad part is you do have ways of actually improving the armor of your infantry units to help out with that. And it's not necessarily very long, but the thing is you're undermining your campaign structure for the sake of it. And, you know, if I'm going to have to pick between getting hero capacity, construction cost, or, you know, Lord rank, global recruitment, and local recruitment versus 15 armor for units, I'm going to go with campaign benefits. And then just not worry about infantry. It's kind of telling that one of the best strategies if you're playing as Karl Franz is actually to spam Reichsguard. That's not quite how the Empire should work out. So, combination of out-resolve, actual battle potential, skill lines, etc., etc. So, a bunch of rebalancing. That's really where I stand on the Empire. They're a good race. Maybe some climate potential, absolutely. But it's really just down to this one singular aspect. Balance. Just rebalance certain things on the campaign level, research tree-wise, Electric Count State Troopers, interactions, maybe even a bit of a rebalance with Imperial Authority. Because, see, the problem that I have with Imperial Authority, it's significantly better than what we had before Thrones of Decay, but then we are in this situation where every territory in the Empire needs to be under your control or you're not going to get the max benefit. But why would I want to wipe out the Wood Elves over here? Sure, there's, you know, some benefits over there. Or, for instance, you have Zufbar. Let's say you go to war with Vlad. You wipe him out, and then Zufbar shows up and takes portions of Sylvania. Well, you gotta kick him out. Because they're not an Imperial faction, so they're actually undermining your Imperial authority. So there's a lot of these tweaks and balance changes that I think would be in order for the Empire that would make them from a pretty good race to as good as you get given the context of Warhammer 3. I think the Dwarves would still be better because the Dwarves do have those dynamic objectives with Age of Reckoning and Legendary Grudges, which, by the way, the Empire could also use a system like that. Give us long-term and medium-term objectives, things to aim for, and improve how those work. That's my perspective on the Empire. Questine signing out. Stay tuned for more.